The ventricles are a network of fluid-filled cavities distributed throughout the brain, aligned with a specialized membrane known as the choroid plexus, which secretes a fluid known as cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF for short. The role of the ventricles is to circulate this fluid around the brain, which in itself has multiple functions. Starting with the neuroanatomy of the ventricular system, there are a total of 4 ventricles. There are the 2 C-shaped lateral ventricles, one in each cerebral hemisphere. The 2 lateral ventricles are separated by the septum pellucidum, a thin sheet of nervous tissue covered on either side by ependymal cells. Note the anterior horn of the lateral ventricle at the front, the temporal or inferior horn on the side, and the posterior horn at the back. The lateral ventricles are where CSF is initially produced, and this fluid flows into the third ventricle via the interventricular foramen, a tube connecting the 2 lateral ventricles that drains the left and right lateral ventricle into the third ventricle. The third ventricle is a narrow cavity that runs along the midline of the diencephalon and resembles a misshapen donut. The hole in the third ventricle is the interthalamic adhesion. The thalamus makes up the wall of the third ventricle. The third ventricle is connected to the fourth ventricle via the cerebral aqueduct. The fourth ventricle is wedged between the cerebrum and the cerebellum on either side. Shaped like a triangle, the peak of the fourth ventricle protrudes into the cerebellum and is connected to the central canal of the spinal cord. The fourth ventricle has both a lateral and median aperture, which drains cerebral CSF from the fourth ventricle into the subarachnoid space. Now let's talk about how cerebrospinal fluid is produced. Remember the choroid plexus, the pink membrane that lines the ventricles? The choroid plexus is a massive capillary surrounded by ependymal cells located on the floor of the lateral and the roof of the third and fourth ventricles. Cerebrospinal fluid is the filtrate that's left once waste and unnecessary solids are absorbed. CSF is produced in the lateral ventricles and circulates into the third ventricle, then the fourth, by which it enters the median aperture, or the 2 lateral apertures, to circulate around the subarachnoid space in the CNS. CSF leaves the subarachnoid space via the arachnoid villi to enter the superior sagittal sinus to join venous circulation. The venous blood drains into the internal jugular vein. Functions of CSF include providing buoyancy to the brain to keep it afloat inside the cranium as to reduce its weight. CSF also acts as a shock absorber to cushion the brain from any damage. And it also provides chemical stability by removing waste and regulating the chemical environment of neurons. Hydrocephalus is a condition that occurs when CSF circulation is disrupted either by a tumor or CSF circulation is abnormally excessive, which in turn leads to increased intracranial pressure and thus the expansion of ventricles.